Math 110, the circle and the ellipse. Section 7.2. By definition, a circle is the set of all points in a place that are at a fixed distance from a fixed point, which is the center, in a plane. Now the standard equation of a circle is going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where my center is hk and my radius is r. So as you can see, it shifted hk, and then the distance from that center is going to be the radius r. And so it's going to be every single point on that from that radius all the way around that distance there. Now for the circle, x squared plus y squared minus 16x plus 14y plus 32 equals 0, find the center and the radius, then graph the circle. So right now this is the general form equation of this conic section. I have to put it into standard form. It's basically saying I need to put it into this x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared form. Now the way that we're going to do this is by completing the square. So I want to group my x's and then my y's together. And so I get x squared minus 16x, and then the y squared plus 14y, and this equals 32. And so with this, I'm going to complete the square. So I'm going to group my x's together, and I decided I'm just going to get rid of that minus 32. And so now I'm going to do b divided by 2 and squared. So negative 16 over 2 squared. That's going to give me 64. And so I want to add and subtract that 64 inside the parentheses. Then this piece right here is going to factor. And so I'm going to get x minus 8 squared, and then I have that minus 64. Now this 1 that's going to be in front of this bracket, I can distribute that through. And so it gets 1 times x minus 8 squared, 1 times negative 64. And so I've completed the square, and it's starting to look like that standard form. Now I want to focus on the y. So I'm going to group my y's together. Same thing, I want to do b over 2 squared. And so in this case, it's going to be 14 divided by 2 and square it. So that gives me 7 squared, or 49. So I want to add and subtract that 49 inside my parentheses. Once again, this piece right here is going to factor. It's going to factor into y plus 7 squared, and I still have that minus 49. Distribute that positive 1 through, and I'm going to get y plus 7 squared minus 49. Now this all still equals that negative 32. So then if I add that 64 to both sides and I add that 49 to both sides, I'm going to get x minus 8 squared plus y plus 7 squared equals 81. This is that standard form equation. So now my center is going to be 8, negative 7, and my radius, since 81 equals r squared, if I solved for r, my r would equal 9. So now we're going to take that information and we're going to plot it on the graph. My center, 8, negative 7. My radius is going to be 9, so I'm going to go 9 points in every single direction. And so being able to draw that circle in, that's going to be my answer. Now we're going to talk about ellipses. Now an ellipse is the set of all points in a plane, the sum of whose distances from two fixed points, the foci, is constant, and the center of an ellipse is the midpoint of the segment between the foci. And so this illustration is pretty good about the idea of how an ellipse is created. There are foci, and then we have this piece of string, and we have a pen that's keeping that string taut, and you just kind of, if you drag it all the way around, you're going to get that ellipse. Now when it comes to this ellipse, this is where my center is 0, 0 here. The axis with the foci are going to be the major axes. So since this represents my foci here, these are my major axes. No foci on here, these are my minor axes. And so we're going to have to find what our major axes is to be able to determine how we're going to lay everything out. So the first definition we're going to look at is where the major axis is horizontal. So the way that we know it's going to be horizontal is if our a squared is under the x portion of our standard equation. Now my a squared is always going to be the largest value. Then it's going to be b, and they're both going to have to be greater than 0. Now it's really easy to think of it in terms of like these definitions here. Okay, this is where my center is 0, 0. This is where my center has shifted, or at least it has moved. But if you think of it in this term, if you know what your h or k is, once you find what your a is to find the vertices, you add and subtract a on your h. Once you know what your foci is, you add or subtract c from your h. C is going to be c squared equals a squared minus b squared. So once we know these values, you can find your c, and you'd be able to add or subtract it from your h to be able to find where your foci are going to be on your graph. Just remember, a is always the largest value, and it will always dictate the major axes if it's going to be vertical or horizontal. So in this case, a squared, largest value under my x portion, and so that's why my major axis is horizontal. Contrast that to the major axis being vertical. My a squared is now under the y portion. And so that's why I'm now adding and subtracting my a on the k, and I'm adding and subtracting my c on the k. My equation to find what my c is going to be the same thing. Example 2, it says find the standard equation of the ellipse with the vertices -5, 0, and 5, 0, and the foci -3, 0, 3, 0. Then graph the ellipse. So since the foci are on the x-axis, if you notice it's changing from -3 to +3, I know that the major axis is going to be along the horizontal. Also, since my vertices are equidistant from the origin, I can assume the center is 0, 0. Because it's the distance of 5 here, and it's the distance of 5 here. My y isn't changing, and so that's why I know my y portion is 0. So I know that my h and k are going to be 0, which is why it's going to be x minus 0 squared, y minus 0 squared, which just simplifies into x squared and y squared. The other thing is because I knew that my foci are along the x-axis, my major axis is going to be along the horizontal, and so that's why I have the equation that has my a squared under my x squared. And since I know that my vertices are -5, 0, and 5, 0, I know that my a is going to be 5. And then because my foci is -3, 0, and 3, 0, I know that my c is going to be 3. And so piecing that together, I want to find what my b is. So I have to plug in 5 and I have to plug in 3 into that equation, the c squared equals a squared minus b squared. Solving for b, you're going to get b equals 4. And so now I can take those values and I can plug them back in. I know this is my a squared, this is my b squared, and so one of these two equations work. This is leaving it as a squared and b squared, and this is multiplying it through. And so those are going to be my standard form equations here. So now graphing it, I know that my center is 0, 0. My major axis is going to be along the x. And so my center being 0, 0 here. Now my a is 5, which means that from that center, I'm going to be moving a distance of 5 here and a distance of 5 here, because that's my major axes. My b is 4, and so it's going to move a distance of 4 here and a distance of 4 here. And then so connecting the dots, you draw your ellipse, you have your answer. Example number 3, it says for the ellipse 9x squared plus 4y squared equals 36. Find the vertices and the foci, then draw the graph 9x squared plus 4y squared equals 36. Now, I need to put it in that standard form, and so divide everything by 36, and I'm going to get x squared over 4 plus y squared over 9 equals 1. Examining this, or at least taking this apart, I can even look at this and say, okay, this right here is going to be my a squared because it's my largest value. And so therefore it's going to be my major axis. My a is going to be 3 because a squared is 9, so therefore a is 3. My b is going to be 2. And so I can start plugging in values for my vertices. My h is 0, right, because it's x minus h squared, y minus k squared, and they simplify just to x squared and y squared, so I can assume my h and k are going to be 0. But because I know my a is 3, I just plug 3 straight into those vertices equations. And I used the vertices equations that were saying that my major axis is under the y. And so my vertices are going to be 0, 3, and 0, negative 3. To find what my c is, a squared minus b squared, and so I get c equals radical 5. So here are those foci equations. I plug in my c and negative c, my h is 0, my k is 0, so plugging all those in there. So my foci are going to be 0, root 5, and 0, negative root 5. So now graphing it, I know that my center is going to be 0, 0, and so I can plot 0, 0 there. My vertices are going to be 0, 3, and 0, negative 3, so that means it's going to go up a distance of 3 and go down a distance of 3. And then because my b is 2, I know it's going to move over a distance of 2. And so now connecting it, I get that answer there. Example 4, we're going to look at a standard form equation of this. And so once again, we're going to have to complete the square. So I want to group my x's together, and I group my y's together. That's why I have 4x squared plus 24x, my y squared minus 2y, and then I subtracted them 21 on both sides. So grouping my x's and my y's together, here I have to factor out the a, and so that's why I took out the a, the 4, so I get x squared and plus 6x. There was nothing to factor out there. Now for this one, b over 2 squared, 6 over 2, which is 3 squared, so I'm going to add and subtract 9. Here, I have that negative 2. Negative 2 over 2 squared is 1, so I'm going to add and subtract 1. And so now this portion factors. And so I can distribute that 4 through if I wanted to. Now this portion is going to factor, and so I can distribute that through if I wanted to. And so now if I did that, I'm going to get 4 times x plus 3 squared. And then that's going to give you the minus 36. And that's going to give me the y minus 2 squared, and then the minus 1. Add 36 to both sides, add 1 to both sides, and so I'm going to get 4x plus 3 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 16. That has to equal 1, so I divide everything by 16, and so that's going to be my standard form equation. My center being negative 3, positive 1, and then my a right here is going to be 4, my b is going to be 2, and so because I know this is under the y-axis, or it's going to be, the major axis is going to be under the vertical, that's why I use that equation for my vertices, and so my vertices is negative 3, 5, negative 3, negative 3, and then finding my c is root 2, so using my foci equation, that's going to be the root 12 that you see added for c. Now taking all of that information, to be able to graph that, my center is negative 3, 1, so it moves over 3, up 1. And so I know because my a is 4, it's going to move up 4, and it's going to move down 4. My b is 2, so it's going to move over 2 and over 2. And so being able to complete that, there's my graph. And as you can see, the vertices correspond to that. It's negative 3, 5, negative 3, negative 3, and so it all fits together.